The first thing when you try to start learning Riichi Mahjong is that you get bombarded with all these Japanese terms and some English terms. Just when you just finish memorizing the Chinese characters, the kanji, and familiarizing yourself with the rules. Among all these terms, some are a lot more important than the others. So in this video, I'm going to cover 50 terms and tips to help you kickstart your Riichi learning journey. If you're new to my channel, welcome. This is Feng. I've been playing Riichi Mahjong for more than a decade, climbing to 8 dan in Tenhou through studying various Mahjong theories, reading Japanese Mahjong books, and even learning from Japanese pros directly by attending their lessons. Over these years, I've coached many players, taught them how to play better by reviewing their gameplays, participating in strategy discussions. My goal of this channel is simple, is to help serious players like you to improve your game with clarity and focus. Oh yeah, literally translated as parent. It means dueler. And the opposite of that is ko, literally translated as child, which is the non-dueler. The dueler is always the first to start the game by being the first player who draw the tile. It's very important to know whether you are the dueler or who's the dueler is because dueler wins 50% more, but the losses from opponent's self-draw win double. The immediate thing you can apply is that you can push more when your hand is waiting. If you are ko, be more conservative going head-on against dueler. In short, if you are Oya, when in doubt, push. If you are ko, when in doubt, fold. 二大四 literally translated as all last, which means the last round. Whether you are playing only East game or South game, it can mean East 4 or South 4. During all last, it is the last chance for players to overtake each other. So dueling that drops your position is more risky than usual. Wins that increase your position is more worthy than usual. So a pro tip, try to make a hand that can overtake the next player in all last. And if you are in lead, be cautious and try to defend it. Renchan, literally translated as consecutive dealership, it means repeat dealership. When dealer wins, the dealer get to play the round again as a dealer. Given enough rounds being a dealer can actually turn the tide by having more consecutive wins. But please be careful, Renchan only worth 600 points in hand value. So be careful not to overly prioritize speed instead of value just for Renchan. Renchan is commonly quite overestimated among many new players. Block theory. At some point in your journey, you are going to encounter these. For example, if you read certain books, they'll always be talking about block theories. Block refers to either a complete or incomplete set of a hand. A standard winning hand requires 5 completed block, which is your 4 sets plus 1 pair to win. Upon identifying the 5 blocks in your hand, make use of the remaining irrelevant tile to form a 6th block that either increase your hand value or improve your hand shape. Take this for example, you have your 2 complete blocks at the top. Below is your 3 incomplete blocks with a lone tile of 6M. Discard the 6S and try to form a new block that can potentially replace the 1-3M block. This can potentially help you to get Pinfu or Sanshoku to 4 times your hand value. When we talk about blocks, there are a lot of terms that we need to use to describe our hand and the blocks. First of all, let's go with the most basic, which is to describe your weights. If you're on Tanki, that means you're waiting on a pair formation. A penchan refers to age weight when you need 3 or 7 to complete 1 to 3 or 7, 8, 9 respectively. A kanchan is a single-sided weight that waits on a middle tile. For example, 1, 3 is waiting on 2, 3, 5 waiting on 4, 5, 7 waiting on 6, 7, 9 waiting on 8. Shampon is a 2 pair of hand shape that is waiting one of them to complete a triplet. All these are considered bad weights and they are not very favorable blocks that we want to have in our hand. The blocks that we want to have in our hands are mainly these kind of blocks where they're on 2-sided weights. They are ramen, ramen, and nobetan. Ramen typically weighs on a pure 2-sided weight. Ramen has 2 of the tiles being used as a pair, which is weaker, hence a differentiated term for this kind of ramen. Similarly for nobetan, it is also weaker that is used to form a pair. This is a lot more important in hands like pinfu. A pinfu cannot be on nobetan weight because it cannot be waiting on a pair formation. Nobetan is a 2-sided pair formation shape. A better weight will be a 3-sided weight, which we call Sanmen-chan. So in this case, it is waiting on 258S. The 3-sided weight versions of nobetan, we call it Sanmen-tan. Among the ramens, there is a further differentiation of the type of ramen that we can have. There are A-class ramens, B-class ramen, and C-class ramens. Why are they different classes? A-class ramens are better because they are waiting for 1 and 4. Having a 1 or 9 in your weight typically makes it easier to win on because it is waiting on a tile that is more difficult to be utilized by your opponents. So to the other extreme end, C-class ramens is waiting on 3-6 or 4-7, which has a very high utilization rate by your opponents. The difference in this weight can be quite significant. A C-class ramen rate has around 60% win rate in general, while A-class ramen rates has around 70% rate. Likewise for Nobetan, there will be its respective A-class, B-class, C-class Nobetan based on the kind of weight they are waiting on. Then we have a bit more complicated shapes that consist of around 3 to 4 tiles. Ryankan, Nakabukure, Yonrenke. Ryankan is the worst shape among these three, but it's also not bad enough to dismantle any part of this due to free turn risk. For example, if you discard 7S and draw in 6S, you're going to be free turn on 4-7S. So if you have decided to discard any of them, you have to be mentally prepared to discard the whole set. Otherwise, the typical advice for any new players is that do not discard any of them. Nakabukure is a decent shape to create like 2 C-class ramen. Or it can be B-class as well. It can be A-class. It can be like 1 B-class, 1 C-class, or 1 A-class or 1 B-class, depending on the shape of a Nakabukure. So you can have 2-3-3-4 or 3-4-4-5. But for this specific Nakabukure shape that I use to illustrate the weakest Nakabukure of all, try not to rely on it to create 2 shapes. Depending on other situations, that is not so clear for other kinds of Nakabukure, but for this, do not rely on it because trying to form 2 C-class ramen from this is not very strong. An additional benefit of Nakabukure is that if you do not have any pair in your hand, you can use this as your pair by discarding 4 and 6p. Do this as your last resort since you already have a complete 3-tile set. Yonrenke is the strongest 4-tile shape to form 2 sets or 1 set plus 1 pair. It is highly valued and often used as a supporting point to discard a penchan to rebuild a set from this shape. Next, we'll go through the terms that we use to describe when we encounter certain push-pull judgments or when we have decided to fold. Push-pull are actually referring to attack or defense. So push is attack, pull is defend. Fold also means defend, which is completely giving up your hand, solely focusing on defending. In these situations, you often find players trying to describe the different danger level of the tiles that they are going to discard in folding or push-pull judgments. Now, the very basic is Genbutsu, which is the safest tile to discard, usually used in folding situations. So when you have decided to fold, you always try to discard the safest tile. And Genbutsu refers to the tile that is already discarded in the player's discard pool. I will not be going in depth of the different danger level of different kinds of the terms. I will just be going through all the terms that people will use for you to understand what it means. One chance. If you see 3 of the copies, for example, this 3p, if you are going to discard 2p, that is referred as one chance. If you see 4 of them, discarding 2p will means no chance. The next most important concept will be Suji. Each of these 2 tiles combination sets that you see here are a form of Suji. If you notice, they are actually making up of the ramen weights combinations. So you can actually wait for 1-4, 2-5, 3-6, so on and so forth. So there are total 18 kinds of different ramen weights. If you are feeling very overwhelmed, just remember in this form, 1-4-7, 2-5-8, 3-6-9. Each of these number combinations has its own sets inside. So 1-4-7 can be 1-4 or 4-7. Multiply this by 2 Suji in each numerical set and multiply by 3 for each suit, you get a total of 18 Sujis. Now it's very important to master this concept of Suji first because it will become the bread and butter of how players decide to fold or to push. That will be heavily used in a lot of discussions. So first, if 5p is safe, the tile you're discarding is 2 or 8, we call it Suji. Technically speaking, this is called Omote Suji. But in the community, when we refer to Suji, we refer it from a defensive point of view and are always referring to Omote Suji. If 8p is safe and you discard 5p, we refer this to Kata Suji. Kata is one side. Since one side 8p has passed, 5p is just a side of the Suji. If 2 and 8 are safe and you discard 5, then this 5 is referred as Nakasuji. If nothing has passed, nothing is safe, and you discard any of these 1, 2, 3 or 7, 8, 9, we refer them as Musuji. The meaning of Mu means none. So please do not confuse Musuji as a kind of Suji. It is saying an absence of Suji. It is not a Suji. And if you are discarding 4, 5, 6 when nothing is safe, this refers as double Musuji because each of these tile has 2 sets of Suji that can be dealt in. For example, 4, you can deal into 1-4 and 4-7. Hence the word double inside. Next will be Yaku-related situations. Let's start from the very basic, Yaku and Han. Yaku is a set of conditions for a particular hand value that is eligible for a win. Han is then the numerical hand value. For example, Sanshoku is a Yaku with 2 Han. At a glance, this looks like a very simple thing, but a lot of new players get confused between these two and they use it interchangeably. A Yaku can have 1 Han, 2 Han, or 5 Han, or 13 Han, but not every Han is a Yaku because not every Han automatically is eligible for a win. For example, Dora. The typical tip for new players is that do not chase multiple Yaku. For example, trying to do Honitsu plus Toitoi, things like that. By default, try to always aim for 1 Yaku that can utilize the Dora easily for more Han. At the end of the day, all you need is just 1 Yaku to be eligible for a win, and your hand value is based on Han. Atozuke literally means later attach. This is a kind of situations where players start melding the hand without forming any Yaku yet. Based on this example given, the player has melded 2-3-4M first. At this time, it has no Yaku. So this has a risk of Furitan. If the player draw 5P, you will not have a Yaku to win and will end up in a Furitan. Atozuke can be easily read. For example, if this player melts 1-2-3M instead of 2-3-4M, it will be more likely that this player is on Atozuke. So the tip here is that if you are doing Atozuke, try to melt with Tanyao sets so that players will still discard Yaku high without suspecting that you are on Atozuke. In addition, Atozuke in All-As is a lot more effective when most players are desperate to win, so they are unable to use the Yaku high and they'll be forced to release it anyway. Katamachi literally means side weight. It is to describe a ramen shape, but only one side of the two-sided weight award Yaku to win. From this example, this player is waiting on 1-4S, but it is on a Tanyao and therefore only waiting for a 4S. We describe such weight as Katamachi. Katamachi on Tanyao is not that bad of an idea because this ramen can still be paired up and changed to shampon. Riichi no mi, which means Riichi only. It is a Riichi that does not come with any Dora and Yaku. Players usually use this term to describe how low value their hand is when Riichi. For every hand, try to prioritize utilizing the Dora. If you are not able to utilize any Dora, try to chase for Yaku aggressively to avoid getting yourself into Riichi no mi situations. If you have learned something from this video, please let me know through liking this video and remember to hit the subscribe button to get notified for more. Next, we'll go through about hand progression, the terms we'll tend to use as our hand progress. So first of all, when we reach Tenpai, it means waiting. If we are not in Tenpai, we call it no ten, which is not waiting. Tenpai is 1 tile away from winning, while no ten is simply not in Tenpai. It's important to prioritize any kinds of Tenpai with Yaku for a highest win rate when someone else has already declared Riichi. Dama literally means silence. It means that when you reach Tenpai in a concealed hand, but you choose not to declare Riichi. This is akin to a hunter laying in silence to prey. This sacrifices 1 hand in exchange for a higher win rate. So for example, this hand is waiting for 6-9P and it can be won without a Riichi, as it has pinful. One of the typical tips for Dama is that when your concealed hand has a Yaku and it's already worth 4 or 6 or 8 Han and above without Riichi, because at this Han level, an additional Han does not immediately and significantly increase your hand value. Keiten, which also means waiting. There isn't a specific English term that I come across that used to describe Keiten. Most people use Keiten as it is without translating it to English. Keiten is a short form of Keishiki Tenpai. It refers to a Tenpai hand that has no Yaku that a hand can win with. So for example, in this picture, if you were to cheat this 9P here, you will have no pinful, no Tanyao, no nothing. But why is it important to know this K10 is because it's generally advisable for any players to focus on going for K10 instead of winning the hand after turn 14. Because the win rate of your hand is going to be very low by then, And instead of risking losing 1,000 to 3,000 points, secure your 1 to 3,000 points from K10. Shanten literally means towards listen. It is the minimum number of tiles to be exchanged to reach Tenpai, commonly used with a number like 1 Shanten, 2 Shanten, 3 Shanten. Note that many players are going to verbalize the number here using Japanese. For example, 2 Shanten, they call it 2 Shanten. 3 Shanten, they might call it 3 Shanten. But most of the time, players will describe 1 Shanten as 1 Shanten. It's important to understand this concept of Shanten because it is the bread and butter to always use Shanten to judge the speed of your hand in any push-pulls judgment. The rule of thumb in a push-pulls judgment is that if you are sure someone is already in Tenpai, for example, a Riichi has been declared, never fight with a 2 Shanten or worse hand. So with this picture in example, your hand looks nice, it has a good shape, but you're in 2 Shanten and 2p is 2 of your safe tiles. It's better to discard 2p to fold this hand. Sakigiri literally means preemptive cut. It is a concept that refers to sacrificing some tile acceptance in exchange for holding more safe tiles. For example, in this hand, it is typically done at 1 Shanten holding a useless honor tile, in this case pay. This helps to counter-attack because you are a lot less likely to deal in when you reach Tenpai. Because imagine that pay is discarded and you reach Tenpai, most of the time, you are going to have to discard this 5M for Riichi. And a 5M can be a rather dangerous tile to be discarded at a time when you reach Tenpai. A quick tip for Sakigiri is that use Sakigiri 4, 5, or 6 at Ishanten when opponents are reaching Tenpai soon. When is this? This is typically at around turn 8 to 9 because the average Riichi turn is 8.5. Kimeuchi literally means decided hit. It is a kind of play style to describe sacrificing tiles acceptance to set up your own discard pool such that you trick your opponent to discard the tiles you need for a higher value hand. Here's an example. You discard a 2S here while keeping a useless chun. This can be as early as first turn, second turn, or third turn. So you can see that you sacrifice another 2S tile acceptance because if you get a 2S tile acceptance, your hand is moving towards a Riichi no Mi. So rather than trying to keep tiles that leads to Riichi no Mi, drop it completely so that you can actually increase the win rate of your high value hand here, which in this case 1, 2, 3 Sanshoku. And at the same time, decreasing your deal-in rate by keeping a safe tile. The reason why I say an early discard of this 2S is to trick your opponent is that your opponent might think that you're probably not likely to wait on 1S if you, let's say, dropping a 2S at turn 2 and then Riichi at turn 10, right? Because most of the time, players are going to think that tiles that you're dropped so early, you do not have tiles around it. So if you have dropped 2S so early, it's way lower chance to assume that you have 2-3 in your hand. Kuinobashi literally means eating extension. It is referring to a call that improve your hand shape, which typically increase your tile acceptance. So for example, in this case, Chi 6P to form 4, 5, 6P and create an extra 6, 7P ramen here. This is usually most effective to do from early middle discard tiles to complete 2 sets because an early discarded 6P by the opponent naturally means that there is a lower chance of this player having tiles around it. If he draws tiles like 5P or 8P, there is a higher chance that he will drop it again. So you can easily form 2 sets in this case. Next, we'll go through terms that is about adapting to new situations. Shibori literally means squeeze. It means to intentionally withhold tiles that the right player needs to stop his hand progressions, even at the expense of your own win rate. This means this player is very difficult to make any melts and only stuck with drawing, making him feel like squeezed. So for example, in this situation, you have a rather bad hand and your right player is dueler. He has ponged a terminal tile. So naturally, you suspect that he's on Atozuke. Since your hand is so bad, there is no meaning to try to help dueler to proceed the hand. Because remember, a dueler wins 50% more. So the tip here is to not discard any of this Yaku high, to not let him get his Yaku. Mawashi literally means go around. Mawashi is taking a detour from your hand's natural progression in response to avoid dealing in or trying to shibori. This often involves discarding relatively safe tile, but not the safest as opposed to folding. For example, if you are sure someone is in Tenpai, like a Riichi, and you are Ishanten, but this Ishanten is not such a good Ishanten because you might land up with a bad shape, a Shampon, 2P, and 9S weight. But at the same time, this hand seems still fightable. You can still melt for Tanyao. So you can consider discarding Suji 9S here to Mawashi instead of discarding 100% safe tile like 4M and 7P. Assist or Sashikomi. Sashikomi literally means insert. Assist, even in Japanese term, they call it assisto. So it's still an English term by default. It means intentionally discarding tiles that the right player needs from you to progress the hand. Sashikomi is the same. It's just that it refers to dealing in to a player. Both require the same skill set, but just have a different outcome. Why do we need this differentiation? Because you can be in a situation where you should assist, but you should not Sashikomi. That means you can afford a player to win, but you cannot afford dealing into the player that let that player overtake you in position. Most of the time for Sashikomi or assist, if you are in first place in Aulas with a decent lead, consider doing it to the player that is in 4th place. In this picture, the player is in 4th place and you have such a huge gap, you can even afford to deal into 8,000. This player is doing a rather obvious hand, perhaps a Sozu Honitsu. So just get rid of all your Sozu and try to help this player win. Now we move on to a more advanced stuff, terms that is used when you're learning about discard reading. The very first thing you have to learn when we talk about discard reading is the concept of tsumogiri and Tedashi. Tsumogiri literally means draw card, Tedashi literally means hand discard. Tsumogiri refers to discarding a tile that is just drawn. So in this case, if you have a hand and you just draw 3M, if you discard this 3M, it is tsumogiri. If you discard 1M here, it is Tedashi. A Tedashi tile shows the importance of a tile being replaced by another tile more important. A tsumogiri tile tends to have less importance. So if you want to learn discard reading, make it a habit to at least notice Tedashi versus tsumogiri, even if you don't remember them. This is very essential before learning discard reading. I don't recommend this if you just started playing Mahjong, but if you are ever very interested in learning discard reading, you have to learn this first. If not, you will never ever get the crucial information you need for discard reading. Karagiri literally means empty card. So instead of discarding the tile drawn, which in this case you have drawn 5M, you can either discard this drawn 5M or the one in your hand. And they are the exact same tile. So this can give certain information to players who are trying to read your hand. Most of the time, I do not recommend any players to just Karagiri by default. By default, you should not Karagiri because unless you have really learned discard reading, you know how your players are interpreting your hand, do not Karagiri as you might give off information that you do not intend to give off. There are some exceptions that you can learn to Karagiri. So here's one tip, is that you can Karagiri if your Ishanten Sakigiri backfires on you. So imagine just now, to keep this pay, you have already discarded a 5M from your hand. The next turn you draw this 5M again is a backfire, right? You Tedashi this 5M, which means Karagiri this 5M, showing your opponent that you are actually breaking a 5M pair and may not need the tiles around there anymore. So that it's more likely that they will drop 7M to you to increase your win rate. Expensive or cheap suit. This is usually refers to discard pool. A suit is referred as expensive when the discard pool shows that it is highly sought after. So if you look at this picture, there are a lot of sozu and manzu being discarded. So the pinzu is referred as expensive. The opposite applies for cheap, which means manzu and sozu are quite cheap. One of the important things you can take note that is to try to build a hand towards a tenpai that is waiting on a cheap suit. For example, for this hand, you have an excess block that you need to get rid of. You can either get rid of the lousy Kanchan 24S or the 24P. But since sozu is a lot cheaper than pinzu, it is less likely for players to be discarding pinzi for you to chi or for you to win. So the recommended action here is to discard 2 4p. At some point in time, you're going to come across with two kinds of strategy. And we call them digital and analog. Some of us also refer digital as textbook. Digital play follows decision making based on like statistical average. For example, Riichi pinfu for its advantage. So if you go by this number, all your pinfu should always be Riichi. Analog plays adapts to some game context like discard reading, which is harder to quantify in nature. There can be a lot of discussion or controversial move that each players play that is biased towards more digital or analog. And there's always this balance between these two. And that's what differentiates between a stronger and a weaker player. Most of the time, players are advised to learn digital first. You learn the foundation, the fundamental first, so that you have the mathematical advantage. But mathematical advantage will disappear once you meet other players who have also mastered the mathematical aspect, or rather they master the digital play. And that's where analogs has to come in. So you should always see digital and analog as complementary. Don't try to differentiate people's play style based on like, oh, you are an analog player, so you do this kind of thing. Oh, you are a digital player, therefore you do this kind of thing. It is true to a certain extent that some players who are more analog will do something more different than someone who is more digital. But the foundation should always be built on top of digital. That means when you meet a very gray area where analog and digital are equally important, and that's where different players will apply different set of skills to a different extent. So for example, this picture, just now we have mentioned that 4-hand, 6-hand or 8-hand should be a Dama. Sorry, I meant this hand to be a 4-hand, not a 5-hand hand. So please ignore the Dora 7p. Imagine this Dora to be something like 4p. So this hand is 4-hand. 3 red Doras with pinfu. The digital play will be to Dama this because it is 4-hand. The analog play will be to Riichi this. Because if you try to adapt to the game context, which in this case, the right player is doing on pinzi Honitsu, nobodies are going to discard 6-9p so easily. It's as good as someone has already Riichi and your winning tile is not going to be discarded readily by any players anyway. Therefore, the analog is to Riichi this hand. With Riichi, the chances that you're going to win this on Tsumo is going to be higher than usual. So you can get your free Haneman here. Analog is more on conditional probability, while digital is mainly on average. Digital will not care whether this player is a Honitsu or not. He just follow that. Based on research, all the games that are used to determine whether Riichi or Dama for 4-hand is better or not, he will always choose to Dama. Therefore, before you learn analog, you have to be very clear on the pros and cons within this digital play concept. If not, your analog is going to be very wrong and very easily subjected to confirmation bias, where you simply just use the reasoning of I am an analog player and therefore I play in this manner. If you fall in this trap in any of a strategy discussion, you're not likely to improve your game easily. I know there's a lot of digest, but do not give up here. If you are new, there's no way you can remember all these terms overnight. So do come back to this video if you're unable to remember them. You can keep playing them. You can listen it as a podcast. You can treat this like an audiobook, or you can treat this like a flashcard video. Starting from the Yaku-related terms, every slide there actually give you a sneak peek of what is the next slide term is going to be about. So you can make use of that to test yourself whether you understand or whether you know what is the meaning of the next term that is coming out. This will help you remember way faster. The easiest way to remember all this is to actively participate in strategy discussions or read them at least, so that you get a gist of how those terms are being used actively, and you can use it to also describe your situations. If you are an intermediate player and you feel that all this content covered are a bit too basic for you, please check out some of the video description below where I cover some of the concepts in a lot more detail. Or check out these two videos and I'll see you on the other side.